Today, we will be discussing the Second American Civil War. Now, why did they fight the war? And the standard explanation is because the North wanted to get rid of the evil of slavery. And that's not true. That's not what happened. So at the beginning of the founding of the nation, the Constitution permitted slavery. Okay, slavery was legal. So the South were free to have as many slaves as they want. The North didn't need slaves because it was an industrial-based economy. The problem was the nation was expanding westwards. The nation was expanding west. And they were adding more states into the Union. And the more states there are, they can send senators and representatives to Washington, D.C. Okay? And the fear was that if these Western states were pro-slavery, then that would tip the balance in favor of the pro-slavery camp. But if the reverse were true, if the Western states were anti-slavery, then the South would be marginalized, okay? So for decades, there's this fierce debate as to how to handle these Western states as they were admitted into the Union one by one, okay? And the solution, what they call the Missouri Compromise, is that for every one state that came in as pro-slavery, the next state had to be anti-slavery, okay? Does that make sense? To maintain a balance. But the problem, of course, is that a lot of these Western states had their own opinions. So some of these Western states, for example, Kansas, would want to be anti-slavery, okay? So for decades, this was a huge issue politically in America, which divided the nation. The turning point was in 1860, when Abraham Lincoln was elected President of the United States. And Lincoln was radically anti-slavery. He believed that slavery was evil and had to be abolished at some point. Okay? The rest of the world abolished slavery. Why is it in America there are so many slaves? So that was Lincoln's agenda. But Lincoln was also a lawyer, and he believed that the South legally had a right to slavery. But over time, what we can do is limit slavery in the West. And therefore, over time, in maybe 100 years' time, slavery would naturally cease to exist. Okay? That was Lincoln's plan. Now, the South did not like this plan, and they were afraid of what Lincoln might really do as president, so they declared independence from the United States. They basically seceded from the Union, okay? And Lincoln, in response, invaded the South. So basically, the Civil War was a battle over how much power the federal government had, okay? So from the perspective of the South, they were fighting the war for their right to freely express their political views. Okay? And the North was fighting to maintain the Union. Slavery was not the main issue. In fact, Lincoln himself said that if I could end the war while freeing these slaves, I would do so. Slavery is not the main issue. Keeping the Union intact was the main issue. They could have chosen to politically compromise. They could have had discussions, right? They could have even broke apart. But they chose to fight a gruesome civil war, okay? So the third thing you need to know about America is that America resolves conflicts through violence, okay? It doesn't really have a history of diplomacy. It has a history of war making, okay? That's how America usually resolves issues. So given this history, now let's look at the conflicts in America today to see how serious the division is. And the reality is that today it's actually very, very serious. Far more so than in 1861 when they fought the first Civil War, okay? So let's look at the divisions. The first major division is basically between the haves and have-nots, okay? So inequality and debt. So the wealthy, the top 1%, not only do they control most of the wealth in America, but they also control what we call the means of production, meaning that if new money comes into the system, they will seize it, okay? So basically, the top 1% have a monopoly over wealth production. And the way they make most of their money is actually through collecting debt, okay? By exploiting other people. And this is what we call a rentier economy, okay? Now, what makes this situation worse are the culture wars.